His blood neutralizes toxins. Gurjiv conducted experiments of separation personality from essence. By the looks, sessions are terrible. Some people scream in horror, some make sounds of animals. His school was engaged in practices of development hypersensitivity and clairvoyance. Here's a prototype of X-Men in real life. Just an incredible amount of hoax and speculations, making out a woman seeking for the truth, some sinister occultist with telekinesis and other supernatural powers. Wim Hof, also known as the Iceman. He could sit in a barrel full of ice for 2 hours. Climbed Mount Everest in shorts, his blood neutralizes toxins. He helped scientists make many discoveries about the capabilities of the human body and mind. Wikipedia calls Hof a motivational coach and extreme athlete, which is also true, but if we look deeper in his biography, we find that starting in adolescence, he was interested in spiritual exploration, practicing and studying yoga, dervish, Sufism and Buddhism. We don't know how deep he studied all this. He says he had no teachers. But we know that in above-mentioned esoteric teachings, it is difficult to imagine meaningful progress without any teachers. But perhaps it was his intuition in studying the world that gave Wim the opportunity to create his unique path and make many discoveries. His vision is the superiority of mind over matter. He claims that man can control his endocrine and autonomous nervous system. Thus, each of us, under certain conditions, can manage his hormones and immunity. Conditions for this is a set of 3 components: special Wim Hof breathing techniques, impact of cold water, and directed attention. He developed the Wim Hof special breathing techniques, which increases the percentage of oxygen in the blood by inhaling more air than exhaling. The possibilities of his consciousness were explored by the Maastricht University in the Netherlands. He could sit in a barrel with ice for 2 hours and even increased his body temperature. In another experiment, he was injected with endotoxin, and his blood simply neutralized it. Then he taught a group of 12 people to do the same thing, and they also experimentally proved this possibility. According to Wim, we have lost the ability to manage our hormones because we are not exposed to such extreme stress as it was earlier. But if you create the stress artificially, while breathing in a special way and direct your attention, you can achieve very interesting results and get back in touch with your body's capabilities. Cold is my only teacher, says Wim Hof. But it is also obvious that the experience of many years of searching and challenging reality helped him to develop a certain foundation to look at the cold and feel it as he did. Hof began to teach his method to thousands of people, conduct various trainings, took old people with him to the mountains, and they all safely returned healthy and happy. Just don't do it yourself, please. You may not have the absolute faith Hof has to do this without his supervision. It's very nice to see that this man, our contemporary, is still alive. He motivates thousands of people, declares his mission to fight depression, to achieve strength, health and happiness. A magnificent mystic who changed the reality around him here and now. He even has his own YouTube channel. I will leave the link in the description.
Life is good, man. Life is good.
Helena Blavatsky. Helena was born in Ukraine, in the city of Dnipro, in a rather noble family. Her family tree leads almost to Rurik. The main direction of Helena's activity was the idea of uniting all religions into the universal doctrine by revealing the commonality of their deep essence and discovering the identity of the meanings of their symbols. All philosophies, including esoteric, all sciences, including occult, because the divine wisdom is about human divisions. This idea was embodied in her works called The Secret Doctrine. First of all, it is a synthesis of ideas of Hinduism, Buddhism, Kabbalah, Neoplatonism and Gnosticism from Helena's point of view. I'm not going to retell The Secret Doctrine here, but I want to give some interesting theses from the first part called Cosmogenesis in order to slightly intrigue all of you. According to Blavatsky, there is something that is eternal, space. Something that has always existed, the root matter, the primordial substance which is the conductor of every physical, psychic and mental phenomenon, and something that comes and goes, the great breath. The trinity of these three things is interpreted differently or even personified in different religions, as for example in Christianity. There is a single reality which precedes everything manifested. It has no attributes and expressed in two aspects. The first one, abstract space representing pure subjectivity. The second one, an abstract movement representing the undisputed consciousness. Consciousness is impossible without movement. The alternation of day and night, life and death, inflow and outflow of the tides, inhalation and exhalation are some of the basic laws under which the entire cosmos works. There is an analogy between the cosmic processes and the individual processes of man. There is a basic identity of all souls with the universal soul. There is an obligatory wandering of every soul through a cycle of incarnations, or by necessity throughout the duration. It should be noted that while reading books of Helena catches the eye her high accuracy, scientific approach and ability to highlight the essence, throwing away all that is unnecessary. And on the other hand, on the internet and in the articles about Helena and in the comments to her publications by some other authors, you can see just an incredible amount of hoax and speculations, making out a very educated woman seeking the truth, some sinister occultist with telekinesis and other supernatural powers. In reality, Helena lived a very bright life. Most of her life she traveled, studied the world, studied in Tibet for 5 years with local Mahatmas, was letting herself what many could not afford at that time, as well as in recent times. So, not surprisingly, people felt mixed feelings and mythologized her a lot back then. In 1875, Helena became a co-founder of the Theosophical Society in New York. After several years, she established branches in India and some other countries. The society continues its activity to this day. The main motto of society is "There is no religion higher than the truth." Helena died in front of her desk, working on the third volume of her secret doctrine that was published after her death. In total, 4 books were planned. There is a museum of Helena Blavatsky in Dnipro city, native city of Helena. Stanislav Grof. Stanislav Grof is a Czech psychiatrist who became disillusioned with the practical effectiveness of Freudian psychoanalysis and began his personal research. One day, an unusual experimental substance called LSD, just recently discovered by Albert Hofmann, was brought to the clinic where Stanislav worked. It has been argued that it can help a doctor enter a condition very similar to a mental illness. And it could help psychiatrists practice a better understanding of patient, let's say by being in their shoes. Stanislav decided to test it on himself in the name of science. He became the best-known psychiatrist who conducted many studies using LSD and a researcher of psychedelic experience. In the late 60s, LSD became illegal. So Stanislav began looking for an alternative, how to help person enter a state of altered consciousness without using any drugs. And this alternative was found in ancient teachings. Thus, having rethought the breathing practices of the peoples of the world, like pranayamas, Stanislav became the creator of his own method, which is known all over the world as holotropic breathing. Greek word holos means whole, tropos, direction. The method is based on a specific long-term accelerated breathing that changes oxygen levels in the body, and special music that enhances the emotions associated with the displaced unconscious material, thereby provoking its release. Attentive listeners will notice that this sounds very similar to the shamanic practices. Well, it is. But the Lux sessions are terrible. Some people scream in horror, some make sounds of animals, others cry or laugh, and someone spreads in sincere joy or lies relaxed, plunged into himself. In general, everyone shows what is usually hidden from the human eyes, what happens and is suppressed in his unconscious. Due to the releasing and full manifestation of strong emotions, in combination with unpleasant physical sensations, the participants of the session get a certain healing and transformative effect. Some kind of cathartic effect. The sessions are supervised by doctors. Grof often draws an analogy between the experience a person feels during a holotropic breathing sessions and the experience that a newborn feels while moving along the birth canal. While it is true that many of Grove's interpretations of holotropic and psychedelic experiences have yielded to criticism of scientific community, but nevertheless, the amount of accumulated empirical evidence and Stanislav Grove's contribution to psychology research cannot be overestimated. Grove is still alive, he is 91 years old. His main activity in recent decades remains group trainings of holotropic breathing. Speaking of Grove, it must be mentioned that he is one of the founders of transpersonal psychology, which combines modern psychological concepts, theories and methods with traditional spiritual practices of East and West. Grove shares the idea that the world is created and governed by the absolute consciousness, and all individual subjects of consciousness retain the essential identity to their source as well as to each other. And we will see that almost all people in today's video will agree with this view. And it makes me wonder. I would also like to say that at the moment, holotropic breathing is the healthiest and most natural alternative way for those who want to go beyond themselves, as opposed to the sessions of ayahuasca and other substances that we will not mention here. Carlos Castaneda, American writer, anthropologist, ethnographer who made quite a fuss in the informational space and left a lot of questions behind. I suppose every one of you has heard the name of Carlos Castaneda. An official story of his life sounds like a plot for an exciting movie. As a part of his master's thesis at the Faculty of Anthropology, Carlos decided to conduct a field research to study medical plants and the thought processes of Native American cultures. In Nogales, Arizona, he met a Yaqui shaman named Don Juan Matus. He soon went to Don Juan in Sonora and for several years, with interruptions, studied with him. In the fall of 1965, Castaneda ceased his studies and returned to Los Angeles, and 3 years later published his first book, The Teachings of Don Juan. The book immediately became a bestseller, as well as all later works of the author. The following training resulted in the books Separate Reality and Journey to Ixtlan, for which the author received a doctorate. After that, Castaneda reduced public activity, started to give less interviews, and, in accordance with the doctrine of Warrior's Way, confused the traces and destroyed information about himself. But that didn't stop him from releasing 9 books after the death of Don Juan. One of the first steps in Don Juan teachings is a keen awareness of and concentration on your own death. The realization of death transforms time into a magical power, gives man an incredible potency for change. When living in a country during the war, I can clearly understand these words of Don Juan. The importance of stopping the inner dialogue and monologue is often considered as an important technique. Sorcerers like Don Juan try to achieve eternal consciousness and become a being of a higher state. The books of Castaneda are a significant work of art, but nevertheless they don't carry much practical sense for the reader, as Don Juan's teachings are clearly intended for a narrow circle of people and can only be passed from teacher to pupil through regular practices. Here comes an awkward question about the motives and goals of Castaneda, who almost became a man of knowledge, but nevertheless published the doctrine to the masses, earning a fortune. For example, some lines may even harm fragile minds. For example, a man of knowledge cannot have high status, family, affections. This prompted many ordinary people to conclude that asceticism and unrealization in society equals spiritual development. Write in the comments if you have such acquaintances. In fact, Don Juan's teachings describe shamanism's conceptions of the world very well. He talks about things that can only be described through metaphors, or only if the other person has such a transcendental experience. That is the essence of true esotericism. It is broader than our language of description. The states of consciousness in which the shamans were are unknown to 99% of people, so there are no words to describe them. For example, in the book The Tales of Power, the explanation of such terms as Tonel and Nagual by Don Juan takes about 5 pages. After reading, none of these terms can be described by any of the existing words, and it's hard to clearly understand what it is. This is the main feature of esotericism. There's no sense just to read it, you have to practice it. However, Castaneda even tried to create some kind of a school, but it didn't work very well. in classical Western style. People with different backgrounds were asked to buy videos, brochures and books. They were selling a pill that could solve their problems. Not surprisingly, there were a lot of dissatisfaction and the school was closed quickly. However, many people criticized Castaneda and his work, and there is even an investigation that led us to believe that he made up all his travels and Don Juan. The author claims that Castaneda made all this sitting in the library and reading the occult literature. Anyway, 12 Castaneda's bestsellers that sold 28 million copies deserve attention at least as a cool marketing case based on the work of the man with the mystical worldview, Carlos Castaneda. Georgy Gurjiv, writer, spiritual teacher, traveler and composer, creator of the original mystical teaching. His own methodology of self-development among pupils and followers was named Gurjiv system. First of all, he was a very educated man who traveled a lot, studied personally and practiced various teachings of the ancient East. Gurjiv was convinced that nature had not fully developed man, and in order to be complete, he should raise his awareness through intellectual development and physical exercises. Many argued that Gurdjieff teachings directly or indirectly influenced the worldview of contemporaries like Hitler and Stalin, who understood everything in their own way and applied this philosophy to their own ends. Gurdjieff came to the conclusion that most people are mechanical and are governed by a false identity, which the parents created by their upbringing. He conducted experiments of separation personality from essence, and claimed that man should strive to develop his essence if he wanted to live a full life according to his nature and not to be a mechanical man. The main information that we know about Gurdjieff teachings is in his 9 books, which are divided into 3 parts with 3 books in each. There are also many interesting things to learn from the books of people who crossed paths with Gurdjieff, such as Piotr Uspensky, or tried to find out something about the sources of his knowledge after his death. Thus, from the book of Raphael Lefort, The Teachers of Gurdjieff, we learn that Georgy studied with many Sufi teachers of the East. Their view of the world and logic is very different from that of Western civilization. The teaching methods are based on living different experiences that were lacking. For example, if a student was too proud, he was sent to ask for alms for 6 months. If he was violent and aggressive, he could be sent to learn to work with jewelry or fine details, etc. The teachers themselves claimed that Gurdjieff's teaching lived in his era and now has no such power. Each time needs its own relevant teaching. In Moscow, Gurdjieff has his own school, where he devoted pupils to his knowledge and conducted various experiments. In 1919 he founded the Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man, activity of which was devoted to the personal growth of man, his consciousness and living in everyday life. Rudolf Steiner, Austrian doctor of philosophy, teacher, social reformer, esoterist, occultist, this list goes on for a long time. Rudolf began as a researcher of Goethe. In 1902, Steiner became head of the German branch of the Theosophical Society of Helena Blavatsky. And in this period he wrote his very important books: An Introduction to the Supersensible Knowledge of the World and the Destination of Man, How to Attain the Higher Worlds, From Akasha Chronicles, and others. Steiner attempted to reconcile the scientific method with a supernatural view of the world, and his view of theosophical questions was more humanistic. 10 years later, he left the Theosophists and created his own doctrine, calling it anthroposophy. Steiner himself, by anthroposophy, meant the scientific exploration of the spiritual world, which, before attempting to penetrate the supersensual world, first develops some powers inactive in the ordinary consciousness and not known in an ordinary science. That's what makes such penetration possible. Goethe's teachings have always been the foundation upon which he has built and developed his concepts. Steiner built Goetheanum in Switzerland and made it the center of the anthroposophical movement. Steiner was the founder of the pedagogical method and the first Waldorf school. These schools operate on the principle of non-pushing of the child's development, but providing all opportunities for his or her development at his or her own pace. The priority is not to master the amount of knowledge, but to identify the strengths of the child and implement his own ideas and projects. It is important that the child doesn't lose interest in learning, understand what he is interested in and what he would like to do in his life. Rudolf also laid the foundation for biodynamic agriculture, initiated the development of eurythmia, new directions in dramatic art, painting, architecture, was the author of social reforms, wrote more than 350 books. It's unbelievable how a person did so much in one human life. In 1923, Steiner founded the School of Spiritual Science, which engaged in practical research and practices aimed at exploring the spiritual component of man, including the development of hypersensitivity and clairvoyance. Here is a prototype of X-Man in real life. During the fascist regime, Anthroposophical Society was banned in Germany, because even before the war, Hitler and local right-wing radicals were fierce opponents of both Steiner and his ideas. At the end of his life, Steiner spent a lot of time studying multiple human incarnations and issues of karma. Steiner was convinced that through freely chosen methods of training and exercises in meditation, one can develop in oneself the ability to perceive the spiritual world, including the higher nature of oneself and others. Such discipline and training should help the individual to become more moral, creative and free individual, capable of actions motivated solely by love. The purpose of this video is to bring you closer to these personalities, and if you want to better understand these people, I recommend you to read their books, which are more than enough. I would also like to warn you against falling in love to the distorted artistic images created by various mystifiers and conspiracy theorists around the stories of these personalities. First of all, these mystics were people who thought differently, were inspired by the search, saw and tried a lot and moved progress. My initial list consisted of 20 people, but I decided not to overload you and myself with so much information and highlighted the most interesting people for me at this stage. In the future, I will definitely do the second part about other people, so leave in the comments the name of those personalities, about the ideas and lives you think more people should know. Thank you all for watching, subscribe and see you in the next video.